near-death experiences do cover a wide range of experiences, but first of all, I think we have to understand where you find them. And it's quite clear now that they can occur in many different situations. They can occur in a cardiac arrest, they can occur after an accident, they can occur during childbirth, and all these obviously affect the brain. They can occur when you're very frightened and nothing happens to the brain, just the fright itself will trigger them. Or they can occur on the Sunday evening. Why Sunday, I don't know, but it's when you're relaxed in front of the fire. And so you have to take all that into account. Now, the characteristics of the near-death experience are beginning to be sorted out now. They, you can look at them as having a particular structure. And by that I mean they quite often, the cardiac arrest ones, quite often start with out-of-body experiences, then going down a tunnel, then meet a being of light, then going into a lovely country garden, English of course, and then seeing dead relatives, and then having a life review, and then you come to a border, could be a gate, could be a stream, something, and then you will come back into your body, but there's no return journey. But that's the stereotype. The actual ones that you get are very different. Now, if you think of what they consist of, then the best thing is to give you a stereotyped one. That's one which occurs often and frequently, but to recognize that what I'm saying is not true. So let's have the not truth. And that is that you leave your body, go up to the ceiling and look down on the resuscitation process. These are mainly the cardiac arrest ones. And you then get a life review. And the life review is interesting because you see what happens in your life, and it's past, well, sometimes future as well. And not only do you see what happened, but you see what happened to the person. So if I'm nice to you, I can see how positive you are to me, and it's very enjoyable for us both. If on the other hand I'm fighting with you and strike you, I feel your pain in the life review. So it can be very painful. And then you will come to a border of some kind, maybe a little gate in the wall, or it may be a river, and you know if you cross that, you'll never come back, you'll die. This is in the out-of-body experiences. When they go up to the ceiling, their bodies are usually in cardiac arrest. It's not painful, they're usually actually quite calm. The separation from the body takes you away from the pain. And they can go into other rooms, they can hear what people are saying in other rooms, they can see objects which people have lost on various windowsills in the hospital and so on. And that's all before they go down the tunnel. Or the experience may end there and they go back into their body again. Oh, children, yes. No, children are different. Certainly the ones we got were different. They're much simpler. They quite often will have, they will just see at the end of their bed an angel who's come to look after them. Sometimes they'll go up to the ceiling and see themselves. Sometimes they'll have a more complicated one of going down the tunnel, but basically they're very much simpler. Much more than they were, yes. And one of my research assistants did a study in Japan, and now there are Japanese studies. Obviously in the English countries like Africa and Australia and New Zealand, there are studies. Yeah, it's all around the world. There are cultural differences. For example, in the West, going down a tunnel is quite common. In Japan, you cross a river. You have to wait for a boatman to come along and take you across the river. The way to get there is different, but there's a lot of similarity once you're there. It depends. It totally depends on the sample. But if you take America, then the prevalence is about 10%, and this comes from a poll of a randomized poll of Americans. Yes, I didn't believe it. It's rubbish. I knew that. I knew it only happened in California until in about 1979, into my consulting room came a patient who had just had a failed cardiac catheter in one of the London hospitals, and he had a near-death experience. He'd seen the resuscitation process. He'd seen them messing it up. He described all the phenomena just as Raymond Moody in his book had. Yes, I had to change my mind completely. So I decided it was an interesting thing to study, so I started collecting cases. And in 1989, the BBC put on a program called Glimpses of Death, and this program was the first NDE program, a full-length NDE program in the UK. And in following that, we got 2,000 letters. Do you remember letters? You open them, take them out and read them. Not emails, letters. And so we read through these, and we realized that we had a very important scientific study here. And important for two reasons. One, which was that 98% had not heard about the near-death experience when they had theirs. So you couldn't say they were copying other people or anything like that. It's quite clear they weren't. This was something which they had experienced. Could it be dreams or hallucinations? Now, when you say dreams, you have to be very careful, because dreaming is a phase of sleep. It's called rapid eye movement sleep. Now, what many of these people is not asleep, they're unconscious. They could never, ever be dreams. Hallucinations is just another way for saying a private experience, and that doesn't get us anywhere. So, yes, they are a private experience. They're what the near-death experiencer has. But just saying they're hallucinations is just another way of saying they've got a private experience. Well, I think science explains near-death experience in different ways. It depends. It will explain it depending on the circumstances in which it occurs. Let us take cardiac arrests, but that's only one way. In cardiac arrests, you can argue that the brain is under a lot of stress, and you can argue after 11 seconds of cardiac arrest that the electrical activity in the brain is not functional. And then it becomes very difficult to explain it, because there isn't a brain functioning which can explain it. So the critics will say, yes, yes. When you are measuring the surface of the brain, it may be going on in the depths. That isn't true, actually. When the surface goes quiet, then the depths are quiet. but there's been new information about how we die. And it's like this, that maybe 5 minutes after you've died, you get a pulse of electrical activity which may last a few minutes. And so some people say this activity is the near-death experience. Well, I mean, there's no reason why it should be, and there's every reason why it shouldn't be, because it's not organized properly enough to support consciousness. But it's an interesting area, and more information about it would be useful. No, nobody's done that. There are locations in the brain that you can produce the out-of-body experience. That's very clear. The posterior temporal junction around here. And there's a lot of information about that. You can produce semi-out-of-body experiences by stimulating it. Damage to certain areas will lead to out-of-body experiences. And out-of-body experiences occur quite commonly. One figure that one survey has come up with is, again, about 10% of people, normal people, will leave their bodies. But in the near-death experience, why do people leave their bodies? Probably because there is some abnormality of the brain in some way, I suspect. You talk about are there life-changing moments, and that is such an important question, because this is one of the growth areas. Now, it just used to be thought that people got particular gifts, we call them gifts, in other words, changes, after their NDE. They became more spiritual. They lost their fear of death, very important. They couldn't be around street lamps because they would go out, and computers and watches didn't work. And some people had telepathic experiences, and they also were able to intuit the future in some cases, they said. But a lot of these claims aren't actually tested, but the people who had them were very certain that they are true. But the cutting point now is that after a near-death experience, you may get a change in conscious level. And that means that your whole understanding of the world changes. For example, in this new level of consciousness you may get, if I had an NDE and looked at you, I would see you as almost pure energy. I wouldn't see you, I'd see your body, but it would be very small. I'd see the energy surrounding you. I would be unbelievably happy. I wouldn't have this little voice inside my mind all the time saying, don't do that. Yeah, that looks good. That sort of thing. So, and I'd also live in the present, not in the past, not in the future, just in the present. And so this is a huge change. Not all of them get it, but the ones who do, their marriages may break up because they are very different people. And a number of them then go into teaching, and teaching about expanded consciousness. It's a transformation process for them, yes. But the main point about having a near-death experience is you don't forget it. So come 10 years, it'll be as strongly imprinted on you as it was at the time. But we've learned something else. We know that they've lost their fear of death. And the death literature is just starting now. Some people suffer terminal anxiety. That means as they're dying, they get very, very anxious. They get anxious usually because they can't give everything up. They remain attached to their family, they don't want to go, and this of course is traumatic. The near-death people have none of that. It's okay, they don't mind going, and that's it. Oh, you can't say that. What you can say is that that's the realm they go into is echoed or also occurs in people who are dying. Now this is very interesting because people haven't studied the process of death. In the process of death, you see spiritual beings, you see dead relatives, they come to help you. You go into another area which is full of love and light and compassion. This is all in the death process. It can be several days actually. You go in and out, in and out, like that. And as you come up to death, then you get this huge change in consciousness when you start experiencing the world quite differently just before you die. And just to surprise you, the scientific evidence is now suggesting that death is an expansion of consciousness, not a contraction. That's where the data has got at the moment. This is really, we all make models of the world, and it depends which model you find satisfying. I find a purely materialistic model a bit limiting because there are a lot of experiences which go beyond that, all the transcendent experiences, experience in altered states of consciousness that seem to indicate experience over and beyond the material form. And I think that sort of model is useful. You see, we can't possibly know what life is because we don't actually understand consciousness. If we understood consciousness, that would help. And so is there a plan, a universal plan for evolving planets? Who knows? But what is quite clear is that if you have very wide experiences, you find yourself to be part of the world and not separate from it. And that gives you a very different model of what life is. So why is the near-death experience important? I think it's important because it focuses, the near-death experience in cardiac arrest, etc., focuses our attention on the actual relationship of brain function to the dying brain. So that's why it's important. The near-death experiences which don't occur during cardiac arrest, the ones which are either when you're very frightened or just sitting by the fireside, tell us something about the nature of the cosmos and the nature of what man can actually experience, transcendent experiences. And this gives you a different view.